It's Deep Focus. It's January 8th, 2024. Peter Apfelbaum is in the studio with me. I'm your host, Mitch Goldman. The show's called Deep Focus. This is part 3 of 3. Go listen to parts 1 and 2 before you listen to this one. Unless you don't want to. There are riches. Where shall we proceed?
Maybe some Hamp?
Hamp. Now, when you say Hamp, some people are going to think of one thing, others are going to think of something else.
And we all love Lionel Hampton, but that's not the Hamp I'm talking about.
But we're not playing him.
Yeah.
And there are people who are way ahead of us already, hoping you're going to say what you're going to say. But what are you going to say?
So Hampton Hawes was a wonderful, underrated pianist in jazz. He was a California person, spent a lot of time in L.A. I didn't get to meet him personally, but I did see him play, and I tried to steal everything I possibly could from him. If you guys have heard what I do, I play saxophone, also piano, and I started as a drummer, so I kind of have always played all three. But some of these pianists were the biggest influence on me because that's where I learned harmony. I feel like I learned harmony 95%, probably more like 98% from listening, maybe 2% from something I got. It wouldn't have been from a book, but maybe just from something I asked my piano teacher, Dick Whittington. I don't know if he's listening, but he's still out there, wonderful musician who lives in Carmel, California. And when I was a kid, I played like a kid. And then when I was about 11, I said, Mr. Whittington, can you show me how to play like an adult? And he played these 2 chords, and I still have been working those chords to this day. And I can sound like a kid or an adult. I've got options. But anyway, I digress. Hampton Hawes was a pianist who, I guess I want to say, I haven't looked it up, but I want to say he was around a contemporary of Andrew. They both had come out of, the bebop era, and were both very influenced by Bud Powell. But one way in which Hamp was different, first of all, Hamp embraced the Fender Rhodes electric piano when it came in. Andrew, I don't know if he played much electric piano at all. He may have, but it wasn't really his thing. But and some people never did. Like Cecil Taylor was like, I'm a pianist, not an electric pianist. Yeah. He would not touch it. Hamp, however, had this wonderful funky style that lent itself really well to the electric piano, and he used it a lot. But he also had this thing. I was thinking of him recently because another friend, musician I really admired, passed away very recently, Les McCann.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody who was a dear friend of my friend Peter Engelhardt, who's a pianist himself, an instrument builder in the Bay Area. They came up together in L.A., and so I would talk to Les on occasion. He's another one who deserves a show unto himself. But Les and Hampton Hawes and others like you could say Ramsey Lewis. These folks came out of the African American church tradition of playing piano and organ. Andrew, not as much. He grew up on the South Side, and he told me about going to visit his friend's church, but it wasn't like that wasn't the basis of his style, at least that you can perceive from listening, not in an obvious way. Whereas the 60s gave birth to people like Ramsey Lewis, Les, and then, of course, then later you had Abdullah Ibrahim, Randy Weston to some extent. These were people who also came out of Thelonious Monk very much, but they were the pianists who were a part of what we now call the soul jazz sound. And that sound caught on, and even my mother, who was not a music fan really, had the Ramsey Lewis trio, the In Crowd.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so this was a time when even Herbie Hancock, who has had such a huge variety of music, he had his hit with Watermelon Man.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, those were genuine top 40 instrumental hits
right.
at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. So Hampton Hawes is somebody who had that in his vocabulary, but he never had a hit. He was just really a musician's musician. But the one thing that I am so happy I got to steal from him is he had a very, very developed left hand.
Yes.
And I don't know how many people out there know what I'm talking about. In jazz, often your left hand plays the chords and your right hand is playing the melody, but you don't get in the way of the bass player. But then if there's no bass player, then you have all of that way to get into. So I learned a lot from trying to copy what Hamp would do on records and watch him. I saw him a few times in San Francisco, and I've always had a pretty good ear. So I would just cop what he was doing and go home and try to play it. There's a lot of good piano players out there, but I got to say there's not that many that actually do that, the walking bass thing. And so that's something that I'll break out with it once in a while. I kind of have my own way of doing it, which is a little crude, but I got to give props up to Hampton Hawes, and I love hearing anything of his. He was maybe not quite as abstract or far out as somebody like Andrew, but I love him for a different reason, and he was just very musical and super funky.
And he, more than maybe any of the people that you were talking about, was really steeped in the church.
Yeah.
Right. His father had been a preacher, and he had a very strong, maybe overbearing relationship on young Hampton Hawes, who I think was he was a junior or the third, I think. I might be mistaken.
I didn't even know that. I knew he came out of the church. I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah. And he was largely self-taught, I believe.
Man.
Yeah. I think so.
Autodidact.
Yeah. So this is what Peter Apfelbaum tasked me with. Find a live unreleased recording of him. And I said, I don't think I can do that. And you said, do it.
You can do it.
Yeah. And with that confidence imbued on me by Peter Apfelbaum, I did discover a recording of Hampton Hawes at the Red Hill Inn in Pennsauken, New Jersey, May 4th, 1957. And it's a trio date with none other than Paul Chambers on the bass. And the drummer is one Richie Goldberg, who I got to admit, that name did not strike a chord for me, but he was a well-known fellow around. This is, I think, down Philadelphia way, more or less. And shall we?
Yeah.
Anything else? This is
Let me just say one more thing, because if
Yeah.
Stephen Bernstein were here, he would say this, or he would want me to say it. Thank goodness that we're living in the time when weed is legal, or at least somewhat legal, because these were the days where, Hampton Hawes, he writes about it in his autobiography, Raise Up Off Me is the name of his book. But those were the days where you could get busted for a joint if you were in the wrong place. And he did like 6 or 7 years in prison for that.
Yeah.
So he was off the scene for during his prime for a while. And that's one reason he didn't get more well known.
And that book is required reading for all listeners of the show. It's been a long time since I read it, but there are so many stories in that book that are burned into my memory, including the fact that I think he talks about it in the book, that he had this like moment of clarity. That I think he'd been sentenced to 10 years.
Wow.
And when President John F. Kennedy was inaugurated, he had this realization, this guy's going to understand my story and he's going to commute my sentence. And he wrote a letter to Kennedy, and then
Kennedy pardoned him, right?
2 years later, Kennedy died, and then after he had died, I think it was, that Hampton Hawes found out, Kennedy pardoned 44 people during his term. The 43rd was Hampton Hawes.
Oh my
And he
goodness.
didn't even find out about it, I think, until after Kennedy had died. And sure enough, he was free. He went back
Wow.
to playing. And he
Wow.
lived another 14 years or so, I think it was.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. But this
Boy.
is before all that. This is May of 57. Crazy stories.
Man,
Okay.
the things we take for granted.
Yes.
Wow.
That is definitely something Bernstein would say. I'm sure. And so we're going to go to the Red Hill Inn, which was a spot. Everybody came through there and played. It's one of those places on a roadside spot outside of the mainstream, but the music was happening. And this was a radio broadcast. I think we're going to hear some announcements maybe from that as well. And the show's called Deep Focus. We are shifting our focus from Andrew Hill to Hampton Hawes. I'm your host, Mitch Goldman. Peter Apfelbaum here in the studio with me. It is WKCR FM New York, WKCR HD, WKCR.org, 89.9 FM, and you can find us on the Deep Focus podcast. Pull that phone out, and whatever you listen to, if you listen to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google or whatever it may be, you can find Deep Focus and subscribe, and you can find out what's going on. You can also read about upcoming shows. You can follow us on Instagram. We are Deep Focus Podcast, Deep_Focus_Podcast, Deep Focus Podcast on Instagram. We put up photos of the artists and some conversations get going. You'll meet people who love the music you love, and I would love to see you over there. It's all free, ad-free, give it away free. Take it with you. There's over 300 episodes up there now.
Wow.
Yeah. And if you don't find it there, you don't do the podcasting thing or whatever, you can go to the hosting site, which is mitchgoldman.podbean.com. All right. So let's go to the Red Hill Inn, 1957. Music from Hampton Hawes on WKCR. If I can. Here it comes, coming around. Any minute now on our little... Oh. Okay. Here we go. Nope. Yeah, this thing, I don't know, man. This engineer, I think I'm going to fire this guy. This is his last date with us.
Hampton Hawes is piano and trio from the Red Hill Inn in Pensacola, New Jersey, just across the river from Philadelphia. Leonard, how about the personnel of Hampton's group?
Well, Hamp has the young bass player who's considered to be one of the greatest of all. In fact, he won the Yearbook of Jazz poll as the greatest new bass player, Paul Chambers, and he has a new drummer, Richie Goldberg. I haven't heard of him, but he sure sounds fine.
And everyone's listening to Bandstand USA on Mutual.
And now we'd like to play for you an old jazz classic, How High the Moon. Thank you very much. Now we'd like to play some blues for you. This is an original of mine entitled Hamp's Blues.
Now, as Bandstand USA takes you direct to the Red Hill Inn and Hampton Hawes.
Thank you again, Guy Wallace, and a very swinging contest that is. And although there's no contest down here as to who's really wailing the most, I think we have a pretty wonderful week of music. Right now on the stand, it's Hampton Hawes, his fine trio, and a real personal favorite of mine in piano and especially bass with Paul Chambers. The drums are Richie Goldberg. Richie Jones. Now then, All the Things You Are is Hamp's first selection, so let's switch it to the stand. Hampton Hawes, the trio.
thank you very much.
A little bonus for you. That's all we have of that set. Isn't that something? Hampton Hawes at the Red Hill Inn, Pennsauken, New Jersey, May 4th, 1957. Hampton Hawes playing piano and Paul Chambers on the bass. Remarkable. Getting to hear him in a live set. And the drummer Richie Goldberg. And we heard All the Things You Are, How High the Moon, and Hamp's Blues. And off they go. The show's called Deep Focus. I'm your host, Mitch Goldman, here in the studio with Peter Apfelbaum. And we've got one more set. And I think why don't we got a little bonus, a little something extra here. That's all we have of that set of Hampton Hawes leading the band. But we do have some music from Hampton Hawes playing with Dexter Gordon. So why don't we get into some of that? So we're in Berlin. It's 1967. And this is Dexter Gordon's leading the band, playing tenor saxophone. Hampton Hawes on piano. Polly Danielson on the bass. Runa Carlson on the drums. And this is Dexter Gordon's take on All the Things You Are. It's Deep Focus and a special shining the light on pianist Hampton Hawes. What's that you say? That doesn't sound like Dexter Gordon. You're right. It's another added bonus surprise. Music. Should we tell him? Who's it, Peter?
So that is Mulatu Astatke, the great Ethiopian vibraphonist and keyboard player. And it's from, looks like a live performance from 2013 that Midge dug up. I have yet to hear Mulatu live, but he's still with us in his, I think, late 80s at this point. I think he lives in Boston. He's taught at Berklee School of Music. But anyway, so it jumped to that. That's another musician whose name I threw out. And I'm enjoying hearing something by him.
I think we could call that Fate in a Pleasant Mood.
Ah. Thank you, Sun Ra.
This is from our city. It's called Special Ethiopia. And the other piece, next one, also is from our schedule Ethiopia. And it's a very interesting piece because these tribes from southern Ethiopia, they are one of those people who have really contributed for the development of jazz in Ethiopia. And not only Ethiopia, in the world, I should say, because as you know, there are two very important scales in the jazz, what we call the diminished scale. There are two types of diminished scales, but these tribes from southern Ethiopia, they play one type of a diminished scale. So, as you know, our great Charlie Parker, or the great composer also, he uses these most long time and centuries ago, but we are still searching who started this first, people in the bush or the two great people. I will probably will come up with the truths very soon. So this is about the national tribes in Ethiopia, which I call them scientists and sound. So we love it. Please play for you and appreciate this music. Thank you.
Okay, we just gave you a little teaser when we told you what we were playing, because that one did kind of sneak up on us, to be honest.
Yeah.
But now that you've had a proper earful, we could tell you what was going on right there. And so let me back out first and tell you that the show's called Deep Focus. It's on WKCR. I'm your host, Mitch Goldman. And my guest tonight, Peter Apfelbaum. We've been having a blast bringing you some music you've never heard. And Peter, where'd you take us, man? What did you do? You slipped us into a laundry bag, threw us in the back of a truck. Next thing we knew.
Yeah, well, next thing we knew, we were listening to Mulatu Astatke. So that was a bit of a bit inadvertent.
Happy accident.
Happy accident, exactly. Yeah, we had talked about possibly hearing Dexter Gordon, but I had been looking forward to hearing this one. And Mulatu Astatke is a really interesting musician to me. He is probably the preeminent composer of Ethiopian jazz. He's from Ethiopia and put out some groundbreaking records in the early 70s. He plays vibes and also keyboards, and I think on that it sounds like he's playing clavinet. But he's really kind of a singular figure as far as I know. I mean, I was in Ethiopia about 10 years ago with Bill Laswell playing with Gigi, who Laswell was married to at the time, important singer, and got to meet some great musicians over there that were kind of part of this whole thing. The Ethiopian jazz musicians, if they get a really good gig, they're playing in a hotel. It's
right,
kind of
sure.
the opposite of here, right?
Yeah.
It's one of those countries where the hotel has the sound system, they have the international crowd, they have the drinks. There's other places to play, but the hotel is kind of the good gig to have. And he was playing at one of the hotels across town, and I didn't get to see him live, but really interesting musician to me, in that he's he's known for playing electric keyboards and vibes, and anybody who's familiar with Ethiopian jazz or Ethiopian traditional music will hear some familiar scales in that. It's very modal, and Ethiopian jazz, I keep using that term, but it was a really interesting outgrowth of, I think, the influence of American jazz on Ethiopian culture, and Ethiopian culture is very strong and obviously very, very ancient. But one interesting side note is that when Haile Selassie was the emperor, which was for a long time, people have various things that they can say about him, but I will just say that he loved the saxophone.
Uh-huh.
And so he had hundreds, if not thousands, of saxophones imported into Ethiopia. And
I've never heard that story. That's remarkable.
Yeah, it became a not uncommon instrument for people to play. And sometimes, they were listening to Charlie Parker and John Coltrane or whatever, but sometimes they were just playing Ethiopian music, which has a rich tradition of improvisation. They have these modes. There's like 5 or 6 main ones. There's probably many more, but and I learned them when I was over there. But anyway, the saxophone is an important instrument, and by the early 70s, when this musician Mulatu Astatke started getting known, he had a band with a lot of saxophones in it.
And Selassie was still in power at that time.
Selassie was still in power, I believe, till 74 or something like that. Yeah, and there's a really fun picture from 1973 of a dear friend of mine over there who was very young at the time, Art Barron.
Oh, wow.
Who was playing with Duke Ellington. He went to play for Selassie. And there's a picture of the band, playing in Ethiopia. Art was about 21, I think.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so there's a lot of worlds converging here, but the final thing I'll say about that track, which I'd never heard before, is that it's really interesting to me. I haven't heard that much live stuff of Mulatu. Mulatu Astatke struck up a friendship with a musician who I have met, who's an important musician in Boston, Russ Gershon, saxophone player. And I know him because he has a group called the Either Orchestra. And when my group, Hieroglyphics, came on the scene and started recording, Either Orchestra was another group that was a large group that had all these different influences, maybe had, African and Latin musicians. It was a jazz-based in a sense, but very compositional. It's funny to talk about my own stuff that way, but Russ and I, there aren't that many of us doing that. Yeah. And with all due respect to Mulatu, he's in that world too. You're talking about taking elements of a very old traditional culture and mixing it and putting a kind of a composition-based music on it. And here there's a big mixture too, because the percussionist is playing very much in a Nigerian Yoruba style, and it seems like there's British musicians there too. So that was a mix and some really interesting stuff.
I hate to break in, man. 3 hours flies by, literally.
Wow.
We're hitting the wall, man.
Check that out.
Peter, thank you so much for coming through. I want to let everybody know once again, you are at Drome on the 21st.
That's right. With Marcus Rojas, Ciro Baptista, and Eric Mingus, and Charlie Burnham, double bill with Paul Shapiro's Midnight Minion. And then Saturday the 27th in Williamsburg, 58 North 6th Street with Kamikaze Ground Crew at the Louvre.
And that's 2024 here in New York City for those of you who are on some other vibe, which is very possible. And you know what? Let me ask you, too, because we're talking about hieroglyphics, and listening to that Mulatu put me in mind of hieroglyphics in some ways. Is that music still available?
Yeah, me too. Well, hieroglyphics, okay, so that's the big band I've had since I was a teenager, and we everything that we've done with that group is not available, or it's out of print. You can find it on Amazon or CD Baby, but the good news is that we're laying the groundwork for recording a new record for the first time in several years this year. So we're going to have some new stuff. We have some new stuff for you.
Get your Peter Apfelbaum music, your hieroglyphics music, your Andrew Hill music, your Hampton Hawes music, your Mulatu Astatke music. You don't want to go anywhere without that in your collection. Find Deep Focus on your podcasting app, and you can listen to this and hundreds of other shows anytime you want for free. You can email them to your friends, collect them like baseball cards, anything you want to do, and this show will be up there in a week's time or so. Peter Apfelbaum, thank you so much for coming through, man. I've just had the best time tonight, and thanks to you.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you, all the listeners out there. We love you, and this was super fun.